Good day to you, my esteemed viewers, and thanks for tuning into my channel. Today we will be looking at the above topic. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you find this video interesting and informative. A narrative on the root cause and birth of militancy in the Niger Delta. This narrative is based on empirical evidence of conflict in the Niger Delta, which started from the rights to self-determination and resource control by militant groups in that region. This narrative examines a round aspect of the words of dominant elites and militia activists, whose actions appear to challenge the legitimacy and authority of the Nigerian state over its control of her natural resources. Oil. The discovery of oil in the Niger Delta region in 1956 brought hope, expectations and opportunities to improve the welfare of the local oil-producing communities and its people. However, in reality, it is the national elites, which comprised of politicians and former military personnel, who have been the principal beneficiaries of oil revenues, in contrast to local communities who so far have seen little or no benefits. In Nigeria, prior to the discovery of oil, exploration of natural resources was primarily controlled by the regional authorities, under the Land Use Act of 1978, and Decree 13. Of 1996, which dispossessed local people from the rights to land ownership, paving the grounds for petrocapitalism in Nigeria. This can be seen as one of the key factors of grievances which has caused the feeling of marginalization among the local communities, particularly ethnic groups like the Izons and Oganis, and as such have triggered the emergence of protests against the state. Initially, the protests were non-violent, but later it adopted some violent characteristics, where the protesting groups engaged in bombing of oil pipelines, kidnapping of oil workers, and confrontation with the Nigerian military. Looking at conflicts generating from oil governance policies. This may appear as rebellious actions by militia against the state as a result of the political elites and multinational oil companies exercising monopoly over the exploration, management, and resource benefits, at the expense of the oil-producing local communities in Nigeria. Also, this might be case where some groups are fighting for their rightful share from proceeds from oil sales, expressing their grievances, frustrations, and resistance from a distorted livelihood and lack of participation in the oil/natural resource management. In definition, militia activities in the Niger Delta is a serious resistance movement that confronts the state power and seek to provide an alternative in oil resource management and control. The government has, however, adopted various strategies to dissuade their activities, including co-optation, amnesty, and offering some form of political legitimacy, where some militia leaders are being brought to the negotiating tables in order to minimize the negative effects of conflicts. The terms militant and militancy may mean different things to different persons. Interpretations of these terms are highly subjective. One might point to the common saying, one person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter. Hence, it is important to understand the relationship between militancy and militia. Militancy refers to a combative and aggressive activism or engagement in struggles for identified causes, while militia is a group of people who are not part of the official armed forces of a country but are trained like soldiers. The relationship between militancy and militia is that militias can be used by militant groups to achieve their goals. Oil governance and resistance by militancy in Niger Delta oil politics are inseparable in Nigeria. Oil wealth often influence and shape the structure of Nigeria's politics and economy. Its significance informs a contest for power and authority, mostly where ethnic minorities who inhabit an oil-bearing land continually seek to reassert claim to own land and oil under it. Resource laws such as the Land Use Act of 1978 and Decree 13 of 1996 vested legitimate rights and authority over resource ownership in the federal government, meaning the Nigerian state negotiates the terms and conditions for oil exploration with the multinational companies. The dispossession of right to participate by local communities in oil extraction through the above-mentioned acts/decrees reveal that the power chiefly lies with the state along with military/political elites and the multinational companies. This is a key component behind the lingering conflict of militia activities in the Niger Delta. Historically, minority ethnic groups have been living with fear of domination and feeling of political oppression in the Niger Delta. This is evident from previous quests for regional autonomy and the struggles for political power amongst the minority groups of Nigeria, further increasing the tension among majority-minority ethnic groups. This had triggered the first militia action in 1966 initiated by Isaac Adakaburo, leader of the Niger Delta Volunteer Force, and subsequent Biafra Civil War in 1967. Both incidents threatened to secede as the Niger Delta Republic and the Biafra Republic, respectively. They seem to have spurred the forms of contemporary militia actions which continues today. Moreover, the discovery of oil created localized perception political oppression, which enabled the Niger Delta Volunteer Force's ideology of self-determination to start a process for contestation challenging the legitimacy and authority of the Nigerian state over its governance on oil. The military regime took no time in describing Adakaburo's/Niger Delta Volunteer Force action as militant activities and imposed a number of political barriers, e.g. killing and imprisoning a large number of activists including Adakaburo, to prevent the activities of protesting groups further. Nigeria's heterogeneous cultural diversity also contributes to the identity politics and plays a crucial role in understanding socio-economic and political foundations of the Niger Delta conflict. It informs the unequal distribution of resources within ethnic groups engaged in the struggles for power and access to resource benefits. The history of resistances, therefore, can be traced back to pre-discovery of oil, such as, from the 1895's Akasa raid against British traders, to perceptions of marginalization in the 1950s, Calabar Agahar Rivers Movement, the armed rebellion of Adakaburo in 1966, the nonviolent movement for the survival of Oganite people of Kensara Waiba, and the contemporary movement for emancipation of Niger Delta, MEND, which morphed from the fallouts of the historical gathering of Izon youths at Kayama community in the early 1990s. This chronology of resistance movements in the Niger Delta manifests the ongoing tensions among ethnic groups in the state, against the latter's monopoly over natural resource governance. Before 1956, the constitutional provision stipulated a structure of regional autonomy that allowed 50% of resource benefits to regions, based on derivation principle. After Nigeria's independence in 1960, this was gradually reduced by the state accentuating the protest and resistance from the minority ethnic groups. The centralized structure of oil governance, amongst other features, spurred a struggle for power along the ethnic lines, and became evident in the nature of political party formations in the country. Such structure of political party formations in the early 1960s, along with feeling of deprivation, informed the action of Adakaburo and created an influence among other protesting groups in Niger Delta. Protest groups have been viewed as platforms of collective actions, for example, Many ethnic groups in the north were affiliated to Northern People's Congress, NPC. The west had its Action Group and the eastern had National Council for Nigeria and Cameroons, NCNC. Militias appear to hinge on similar ideology of self-determination and resource control. This was coherent with the views of some locals who insisted that the lack of basic socio-economic amenities in communities spurred the resistance/conflict in the region. Their response, like other militants, made reference to Adakaburo and Kensaro Wiva as leaders who inspire much of current militia actions. This also shows how past experience of exploitation can evoke contemporary collective action. According to Warman, a Niger Delta militant, "We have been fighting for the course of the Niger Delta for years. People like Isaac Adakaburo came on board, fought for the struggle and died fighting. Kensaro Wiva came on board, fought for the struggle and died fighting. As you know, we are the people that are feeding the whole country, but if you come to my community, there is no electricity, no road, no drinking water, nothing, and nothing. We are fighting with the government to let them know about the Niger Delta situation. We cannot go to Abuja to fight them, so we have to destroy pipelines and embark on illegal bunkering business." The military rules, along with political oppression, have also further increased the tensions and violence in the Niger Delta. From 1966 to Nigeria's first transition from military to democratic rule in 1979, the Delta witnessed series of sustained brutality and killings from Nigeria's military authorities. Nonviolent protest agitation, which began as writing protest letters to oil company management as demonstrations against these companies, often ended with the brute force of oil company securities, supported by the military regimes. Such instances eventually gave these protests some violent attributes, as was illustrated in the aftermath of Ogle protest. The case of Ogle procession represents a key historical moment of state brutality as well as conscious awakening to resort to arms in defense of making claims for the legitimate rights, perceived by the protesting groups, over oil and other natural resources in the Niger Delta. The following was described by Otwan. "We were protesting in a non-violent way. We carried placards and leaves without weapons or guns. But in all the protests to express our grievances, the federal government would use military might, not police but the military might. On one such protest along the Hospital Road junction, some soldiers led by Army captain opened fire on us. They stood in 3 lines. The first group kneeled on the floor, other groups a little higher and others standing. They opened fire and 4 persons were killed. I personally carried a boy from Ophia whose stomach was torn by bullet in wheelbarrow to a clinic nearby." The repercussion of the Ogle procession thus seemed to have given a new meaning and understanding of protest amongst these groups, particularly the Izons. The government does not believe in advocacy, so the process for advocacy have not helped the engagement of communities in the Niger Delta with the federal government. The repression from state brutality as response to protest and agitations eventually led to arms confrontation. The federal government got involved in Ogle and since then we started shooting at them too. Between 2006 and July 2009, the coordinated attacks by militant groups such as the MEND accounted for about 300 deaths and 119 oil workers being held hostage. The daily oil production also drastically reduced during this time, from 2.6 million barrels of oil per day to just 700,000 barrels per day. This was despite $3 billion annual spending by the federal government and oil companies on security to protect oil facilities in the region. No surprise the state and oil companies are labeling these protests as militant activities. Furthermore, there have been efforts to buy out different factions of these groups, bring them to negotiating table, offering them amnesty and spaces in mainstream politics. One such process is informal payments made by some governors to militant leaders in the Niger Delta, illustrating another important aspect that has helped the conflict and militancy to continue. Payments like this serve a dual purpose. First, this provides state governors an opportunity to use his discretion to spend money from the treasury, generally without much question, to buy peace through security votes and capitalize on the tension and insecurity. Second, this also offers political leaders a means to strengthen relations with key militias for election times. However, such payments are often unevenly distributed among the ranks of militia groups and might raise the question whether these groups are motivated by greed or grievances. The amnesty programs. The introduction of amnesty program depicts the CO option process by the state and also draws attention to a shift in the ideology among the militia groups. Amnesty programs aim to bring the militants into formal and informal structures of resource benefit, by opening up spaces for key militia leaders to gain access to mainstream politics. From a critical perspective, the Niger Delta region can be described as an arena of contested entitlements, a theater of struggles where the politics of recognition are being played out. In this particular case, the protests of the Oganis and Ajas, how it shaped a particular form of resistance and collective action. It partly demonstrates the political opportunities or constraints for the success or failure of movements, and state capacity for repression. Also, the legislative laws of resource extraction have been central to the conflict surrounding the Oganis and Ajas, as well as other ethnic minorities of the Delta. The narratives and meanings behind militia action are socially constructed. Protesting groups were labeled or framed by the state/media in various ways, as oil thieves, criminals, kidnappers, cult gangs or restive youths. While militants, on the other hand, see themselves as freedom fighters, liberators, or resource agitators. These labeling manifest a particular kind of reality with varied meanings and interpretations both at the individual and collective levels. The meaning of militancy, therefore, is not straightforward. They cannot be conceptualized within a binary framework of true or false, bandits and common criminals or freedom fighters. They are socially constructed within the narratives of the state, powerful elites, and various other groups. This must be also noted that, for some militia, such activities can be an opportunity to make a living. As some members being recruited in militia groups in the context of their desperation to survive, often indirectly paid by the state or other political sources, while others drift into militant activities having become involved in oil theft, in order for their subsistence. Moreover, some militant leaders may appear to be driven by the potential to secure both material and political influence. The prospects for them to access oil benefits are intrinsically linked to the role of political elites and porous boundaries of patronage relationships which underlie the continuity of militancy in the Niger Delta. The rise in the number of militants from 150 in 1966 to 22,356 by 2014 did not emerge out of spontaneous, frenzied mobilization, but through a series of historical events within formal and informal structure, socio-political events, and shared perceptions. In conclusion, the Niger Delta conflict is rooted within the history and culture of resource governance in Nigeria due to decentralized structure and composition of the country, prior to its independence in 1960, enabled a regional autonomy over resource ownership. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel by clicking on the like and subscribe buttons below. Thank you for your time and see you soon.